I see the flip side of the coin of what Ross talks about. When I sit and listen to Ross, I think a lot of what he's talking about is similar to the First Amendment. And the thing about our Constitution and the thing about the internet and the world we live in is there's a number of other amendments that we consider equally important in our Bill of Rights, things like privacy, things like property, or when it comes to information, things like security. And along with a free and open internet comes issues of security and privacy. And so what I deal with on a day-to-day basis is trying to figure out how we balance and how businesses balance and deal with the flip side of the coin. In other words, in a free and open internet, how is a business able to protect the security of the information that it gathers? Or what is a business able to do with the information it gathers about its customers? What are their privacy concerns? What I don't deal with, but what is obviously just as big a concern, and I'm sure we're going to talk about today, is how we balance free and open internet with international concerns, particularly international criminal concerns or international terrorist concerns. So that's the biggest thing I deal with, is the flip side of the coin of a free and open internet, which is not to say that there shouldn't be a free and open internet, just that we're on very much the cutting edge, or almost the bleeding edge, of figuring out how to deal with the costs of it.
So some thoughts from a Dyn perspective. As an internet performance company, the more people on the internet, the better. The more companies that can start and run and do commerce all around the world, the better. So a free and open internet is certainly important to a company like Dyn, no question. But the perspective I think I would add to the conversation tonight is, how easy is it for people to start a company or run a company or expand a company? As we expand outside of the United States, we're doing more and more business internationally. We have an office in the UK. We now have an office in Australia. One of the areas we're wanting to do more business in is in South America and Brazil. And the regulatory hurdles there are certainly challenging. And they're challenging for us. They're challenging for the customers that we want to work with. So while we certainly support an open and free internet, we also want to drop the barriers for entry for companies to be able to start and drive commerce over the internet.
When I listened to Ross's comments, it made me think back about what was happening in the world before Transparency International actually started publishing its corruption indexes and its bribery indexes. Governments around the world were able to operate not so much above board and to create deals that were not in the best interests of its citizens or in the governments themselves. But when they started publishing that information and publishing these indices, people started listening. It started impacting the foreign direct investment that was going into those countries. That, more than anything, was a driving force in some of these countries changing their behavior to allow for a less corrupt society. Now, that didn't mean that it eliminated it, but it certainly put it in perspective. So when I think about the issue of the open internet, more education, people being aware of what's going on, small businesses as well as corporations have to be involved in the conversation. They have to get the information. There's a wonderful website out there called opennet.net that lists a lot of what Ross was talking about in terms of filtering and censorship. And it lists 61 countries, their country profiles. And it also does some regional analysis on this subject. And we've got to get people going to those sites, understanding it, raising questions, and thinking about where do they want to put their money in terms of the future.
I'm glad the issue of security and privacy came up, because I want to be clear that I certainly am not advocating, Google doesn't advocate for an anything goes approach online. That's not what we mean by free and open internet. You know, child abuse imagery is universally illegal and derided and has no place online. And whenever we find images like that, we report those images to the authorities, and we have these relationships all around the world. So I don't want anyone in this room to feel like I'm saying, hey, internet, anything goes, do whatever you want. But the reality is that the same laws that currently apply offline already apply online. And anyone who argues differently isn't to be believed. And I also feel that, you know, when we talk about free and open, privacy, rather than, I wouldn't call it the flip side or the opposite side of the coin. I think they're all very much interrelated. And the only way that you truly do have freedom online is to also have rights of privacy and rights of security. It's a matter of finding that right balance, certainly. But I think there is a tendency to view them as one or the other. And I actually think that they're completely intertwined and interrelated. You're not going to feel like you have freedom to post a comment critical of the government if you don't feel that your data and your identity as a user is safe and secure from those governments. You're not going to feel like you can engage in a debate online unless you feel like you have some security over your data and your profile and some sense of privacy about when to engage and when you don't want to engage. So I absolutely agree that they're very much interrelated. I would just urge us to not think of them as like opposite sides of the coin, but rather very much intertwined and intermingled. And then I know I've already spoken so much, but Charlotte's point about transparency, I think, is exactly dead on. You know, we abide with the law in every country in which we operate. We have to. Again, we don't feel like we're above the law. But one of the things we do is we push back very hard when we feel that governments are imposing regulations or laws under the guise of child safety, for example, like in Russia. And then you find that the list of websites that are harmful to kids is every website owned by the opposition. So we push back on that. But the most powerful, I think, thing we do is we say to those governments, we'll comply, but we just want to let you know that every single request that comes in is going on our transparency report. Every single request for user data or every single request for content takedown, we're going to list it out every 6 months, and we're going to show the world the number of requests that we comply with. And that has a tremendous impact on government officials. We get calls from government officials saying, no, don't put that up there. You don't have to list that. That's part of the deal. So that even the promise or the threat of transparency can be enough to really make a difference in these situations.
Do you have anything?
No.
Okay. I think I'll preempt one of the questions I know that Ross is going to get and see if anyone else has thoughts about it, but it has to do with China, which is obviously a huge emerging market. How do you balance freedom and economic concerns, cybersecurity threats even to the US, from Google's perspective and kind of how you all see it?
Well, maybe I'll start there. China is a market that we're certainly interested in. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity for a company like Dyn in China, but it doesn't come without its challenges, especially from Manchester, New Hampshire. I think it provides, the list is long in terms of all the challenges that we have. Certainly distance is one, but even with a couple of people that have gone on the ground there, the government certainly makes it difficult. But we still yet offer a product for companies in China that want to leverage our services within country. And we've had a little bit of success there. But again, the government makes it very challenging for us. The business environment there is very challenging. I know Ross spoke a little bit about some of the challenges Google has had there. And we're nowhere near the size or scale that Google is. And it's an interesting market. There's so many people there, so many businesses there, so much opportunity there, yet it seems so far away.
And I think that a challenge probably from a small business startup, because I teach that, and I see a number of students who come from China here, and a lot of them want to start their own businesses. They've learned some of the opportunities that are here, and they want to be able to go back and contribute to their societies. But some of them feel that there's a restriction on being able to do these things. So here we are trying to educate a new population of people to be business owners, to create jobs, to create employment, which China's going to need. They're not going to benefit from the current companies that are there. Some companies are reshoring. We had this discussion this morning in class about jobs coming back. So some of those jobs are going to disappear. They need a platform for creating new jobs. But if this restriction on information is going to prohibit this, their brain trust is not going to stay in China. They're going to go somewhere else in the world. So they have to begin to think about that impact on their own economy and society.
Before this current role, I was in Asia Pacific for almost 3 years. I was based in Hong Kong. I got sent over there in January 2010 to deal with the China crisis at the time. And it was certainly an experience I won't forget. And it's very prone to simplistic explanations, but much more difficult. I mean, what happened to Google in China was when we first made the decision to go into China, it was a very difficult decision in the first place. There was a question about, do we get more? Can we do more by engaging and by being present, or do we do more by sort of not engaging and staying outside the country? And the decision that Larry and Sergey made when they decided to go into China was, we're going to go in, but we're going to continue to monitor this and see how it goes. And that's exactly what happened. We opened a very large office in Beijing and one in Shanghai. And China is full of incredibly creative and entrepreneurial people. It's a really dynamic, fascinating market. But what we found was over the ensuing years, the number of censorship requests that we were getting from the Chinese government was increasing day by day by day. Every day we would get a list from the Chinese government about terms that we had to block from our search results. And not only were the list of terms increasing daily, but they were getting more broad. So there would be a government official who would get into a car accident at the juncture of Elm Street and Juniper Street. Elm and Juniper on the list. So we started, and all the time we're trying to engage the Chinese government. And what happened is, the straw that really broke the camel's back was a very well-publicized attack on our infrastructure, which we believe came from the Chinese government. And it was at that point that Larry and Sergey, our founders, decided that, you know what? We don't feel like we're making a difference here. All we feel like that's happening is that we're just being a part of a system that we're not very comfortable with. And so in January of 2010, we announced that we were not going to be running a search engine in China anymore. And that was, as you can imagine, that's a very difficult decision for any corporation to make. You're basically saying to the world's largest market that, we're not going to play by these rules anymore. We're going to leave. So I spent the next 3 years basically trying to improve our relationships with the Chinese government to explain what we did and around the region. Now, ultimately, I'm really optimistic about China. I really am. I think what we're going to see is, but in the short term, things are bad and they're getting worse. But I think ultimately what we're going to see is we're going to see a greater appreciation for what walling off that society and that economy will do to that country. You're seeing, as Charlotte mentioned, flight of the greatest minds of that country. Where did Alibaba go to get capitalization? He went to the New York Stock Exchange. He He didn't go to the Hong Kong market. He didn't go to the Chinese market. He came to New York. Where do the Chinese elite send their kids to school? They send them to the United States, right? But ultimately, why I think I'm optimistic is because I really believe that open beats closed in its fundamental sense. So the Chinese government can get the 10,000 smartest engineers, or they can hire 20,000, the smartest engineers they can find, and they can have them on their payroll to build this censorship regime and this filtering technology. But those 20,000 people are never going to be as smart as the 3 billion people who are online, and the 300 million Chinese, and 300 million people in China alone who are online and want access to the information they want, and they want to do the sharing and the communicating that they want. So it's really a numbers game. And that's why I'm ultimately optimistic about China.
Does anyone have anything else to add before we...
I want to know when we should keep investing in China.
I think we'll open it up to questions for the audience. And if you could raise your hand and wait until a microphone comes over to you. Keep it to one question, please, until we get around to everyone. And they'll come around.
Where do you want to go?
In the front, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Is it work? Oh, yeah, it's working. You just got to get it oriented properly. I agree with most of what I've heard tonight. But I do have a question that I've been thinking about a lot and have really not come to a satisfactory answer in my own mind. And that is, how do we deal, or Google or our society in general, with a situation in which the internet, through social media, comes to a conclusion about some set of events that is really contrary to the processes and decisions of the American judicial system? How do we resolve that issue? And I'm thinking, obviously, of the Ferguson situation. Ferguson, Missouri.
I'll start off. I mean, Ross is exactly right on this. The beauty of the internet is it's impossible to fool 200 million people. Eventually, just by the dint of information that gets out, the truth ultimately gets out. But Ross is also right that the internet is no different than the real world. The real world just works a little slower. So the real world will catch up, and the judicial system will catch up if the 200 million people don't get there somehow first. There's nothing clean about this. And that's part of the beauty of it. There's nothing regulated about it either, or not a lot regulated. There will be more and more as we go on. But there is nothing clean. And we're, I feel, at the very beginnings of how we figure out how to govern the internet. As I said, I kind of see it as a very early system of non-government or government. But the problem is there's just no general central regulation of it. So the judicial system will catch up. The international bodies that regulate a bit the internet will catch up. I'm not exactly sure how, but it's not going to be clean. It's not going to be clean. And in the short term, it's not going to be clean. It's not going to be clean in places like China. It's not going to be clean in places like Missouri. It won't be clean in places like Syria and Iraq. But eventually, you can't deny 2 million, 2.7 million, the 4.5 million people that will be on the internet through mobile devices eventually. It's really hard to fool that many people.
I also think, I think that's exactly right. I think we're in the very early stages of seeing the promise of the internet and this technology. And it's not easy. It's very disruptive. But I agree that as a society, as we engage and continue to debate these issues, we're going to get to a place where I think where as a society we've made decisions about what we feel is appropriate or what's not appropriate. The thing that I really want to emphasize, though, is that that process has to be part of the way that we teach our kids. Like, I will tell